Okay.
Start now?
Sure.
Okay, I'm starting March 18th, 1930, the day I was born. Why not? And the funny thing about it is my mother went in, and I was supposed to be born on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, and my name then would have been Pat instead of Bill, but she delayed one day, and to add to the confusion, the doctor's name was Dr. Patrick. Can you imagine? Nothing worked out for March 17th. Anyhow, I'll start with my life in Montreal, and I was there 23 years before I moved to Calgary. And some of the highlights from Montreal, we had, being from Montreal, Montreal was about 45% English, 55% French, and a whole lot of others in between, Italians. So on our street we had everything, French, English, Italians, and I had a lot of good friends. And in Montreal, in our area, we played two chase all. We get about 30 people there at night, around 7 o'clock at night, and two were chosen, which they didn't want to be. And then when the rest was, they give us 2 minutes, and we'd hide all over the place. And then the two try to chase the remaining 28 until everyone was caught. It was called two chase all. And some of the funny things were, it wasn't dark, of course, and this one fellow, he was French, and he was on his patio on his wheel in his rocking chair, and we went across his lawn, and in French, in English, he said to us, "Hey boys, you don't come across my lawn anymore. If you do, I make my foot to pass by your house." And we said, as long as it passes by, that's great, you know. That was called two chase all. And then the next, I played a lot of tennis in my life there in Montreal, and the thing that beat me most was the heat, the humidity. You come to Calgary, there's no humidity. If you lose, you can't blame the weather. So anyhow, I was there for 23 years, and then I came out here to Calgary on November 7th, 1953, and it wasn't called Air Canada, would you believe it was called Trans-Canada Airlines in November 53. And the ticket agent, the girl in the Trans-Canada Airlines office in Montreal said, "You're going to Calgary, you're going just to visit, right?" And I said, "No." She said, "You're not going to stay. Have you been to Calgary before?" And I said, "No." She says, "Well, I have, and you can crawl through the downtown in your hands and knees in less than 5 minutes. Do you still want to go?" And I said, "Yep." She says, "Well, I'll make your trip worthwhile." So she routed me Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Edmonton, Calgary. And I'm a football fan, and to my delight in Winnipeg, on the plane came the Winnipeg Blue Bomber Football Club. They were on their way to Edmonton to play in the Western Football Final, and I got to talk to them, so that was kind of neat. Then I got out here on November 7th, and I was staying with friends of mine. And then a lot of good things happened. But going back to Montreal, just for a few minutes, I graduated from high school, went to University to McGill, got my Bachelor of Commerce, then got my Chartered Accountant's degree, went to work for Price Waterhouse in Montreal. So when I came to Calgary, there was a lot of young people in the First Baptist Church here, about 50 of them. But they had no leadership. And in Montreal, where I was, we had about 15 people, and everyone was a leader. You might say, you're not supposed to say it, but I'll say, we were all chiefs and no Indians. So anyhow, that was it. And I got out to Calgary, young people's here, and a young lady came up to me one night. She said, "Bill, are you very busy these nights?" I looked her right in the eye and I said, "No, would you like a date?" Well, in those years, that didn't go very big. And she went all kinds of colors. She says, "Nothing like that. Let's get serious." So she made it worse. Let's get serious. I said, "Okay, let's get serious." Anyhow, what she was trying to ask me was, where she worked, they needed an accountant, and she was going to recommend I go along and see if that interested me. Well, I went along. It interested me, and I stayed there for over 20 years. So that was a neat combination and a lot of fun too. Well, getting back to Montreal just for a second again, the war years. The Second World War started on September 1, 1939. So I was born in 1930, so I was 9 years old. So I collected all the papers. I delivered the Montreal Star newspaper. I collected all the papers about Germany starting the war and all the war happenings. And I collected all those papers. And my son Rodney has all those papers now for future reference. And as I got older, the war stopped 6 years later. By that time I was 15. But basically, yeah, 15. There's a picture of me, 15 years old, and that was just before the war ended. And so, being almost 15 years old, and nobody knew how long the war was going to last, would you believe I was part of the Sea Cadets and also part of the Air Cadets, and we were training in case the war kept going. And I still have my wings from the Air Cadets. But the war was quite a time to grow up in, to follow what was happening, and talk to some of the servicemen, and well, nobody likes war, but I was part of it, and it was an exciting time. Okay, so I came out to Calgary on November 7th, 53, stayed with friends of mine because that was prearranged, and then started to work here, and basically, I wouldn't have come to Calgary if my office manager in Montreal had not been from Drumheller, Alberta. His name was Ed Dwyer, and in those days I was quite skinny and not too healthy. I was 6'2" and weighed 156 pounds. He said, I'm going to send you out to Calgary where you can get some fresh air in your lungs. The mountains there will give you fresh air, and basically you'll put on some weight, and you go out there for a year and a half. If you don't like it, they don't like you, come on back. It's always here. So that's how I came here, and I'm still here. And I just celebrated a few months ago my 90th birthday. Can you imagine? 90. I said they must have made a mistake in my birth certificate. But anyhow, that's how it works. And one last thing about Montreal, sorry for going back, but going to high school, 4 parts of Montreal, north, south, east, and west. The west and the south were English, and the north and the east were French. And on the tramway, we call it the tramway. It had went by wire, something like our LRT here in Calgary now, only it was a lot slower, of course, and it went on wires. And so and the little French guys with their mustache, they drove the Montreal tramway car, electric car. And this one time, this car backed up. There was about 100 of us students waiting to get on the car, and the little guy backed up his car, and then he went forward. Wasn't even going to pick us up. So we went after him and pulled the trolley off the wire, and we all piled into the car. And he wasn't very happy about that, and we weren't happy about him not picking us up, I guess because we were English. Anyhow, he said in his great French accent, he says, we're all in the car. He says, I don't care, boys. If you don't put your tickets in the box, but don't spit in my face. That means don't make fun of him. Make fun of him? We sang a nice song to him that he didn't appreciate. It goes like this. I work for the tramway company. I get big wages, you can see. Collect the ticket and punch the fare. Where you go, I do not care. What for did you go by my stop? Shut your face, I call the cop. We had 2 verses of that, which he didn't appreciate, but we had a lot of fun with that. So that was the tramway company. I think that's probably my last few items to tell about Montreal. There's lots more to tell, but there's some of the highlights for you. I had a great life, 23 years old. I took off, left a few girlfriends crying in Montreal, but said, don't worry, I'll be back in a year and a half. And that never happened. So I had to find some new girlfriends here. I went to work I was working for Price Waterhouse, and then I switched over to Husky Oil. And would you believe that's where I met my dear wife. She came marching in one day, and she was doing IBM, IBM and Xerox. She was a punch card operator, and that's how it was that day for accounting. And she went to work for a supervisor who I knew, and practically everyone in Husky was married except Eileen and I. And so I said to Robbie, that was her boss, Eileen's boss, if she's worth a phone call, let me know. 3 weeks later, she says, give her a call. I gave her a call, and the rest is history. I rode up, and then I got skiing out here. They started skiing here in November, and I was ice skating in November, which was neat. And I skied for quite a few years. And then years later, quite a few years later, because we had 3 children by that time. We had 2 boys, Larry and Rodney, and then Diane came along. And Diane came home from school one day and said, Dad, guess what? I said, what? She says, there's a contest on the radio. If you have a ski poem and you include Lake Louise and skiing, there's a big prize. And I said, what is it? She said, oh, you go to Lake Louise for 6 days, all expenses paid. So anyhow, you already written a poem, just add Lake Louise to it. So I'll give you a few verses of the poem. There was 650 entries, and my dear wife Eileen says if the supervisor checking what you're sending in has a sense of humor, you'll probably win. Well, I gave him 23 verses of corny stuff, and here's a few verses from the winning poem. Writing poems is my work. Some of them are quite berserk. Keats and Wordsworth, as you see, haven't got a thing on me. Now the ski poem. When it's springtime in the Rockies and the snow is melting fast, we head to the hills for the greatest of thrills and ski while daylight lasts. There he goes, but one false move. His skis just failed to fit the groove. He happened to be chasing a certain she. Too bad, poor boy, he hit the tree. And then, to take ski lessons is the fad, especially if your skiing's bad. First you learn to bend the knees, watch the trees, $20 please. And then finally, one of the last verses was, and do I still remember it? Any event, that gives you 3 or 4 verses of the poem, and we won the prize, and I took my 3 kids up to Lake Louise, and we didn't go. It was for 2 people for 6 days, and I told the supervisor, we have 4 people, how about 4 people for 3 days? He said, well, you can do that, but you won't get the same thrill out of it. So I took my 3 kids, and we went for 4 people for 3 days, all expenses paid, and it was really wonderful. And it was in the spring in March, you know. So that's a little bit about coming here. And what else have I got here? Oh, yeah. I think that's some of the highlights. And of course, coming to Calgary, and I'm still here. And I went to work for Husky Oil. And then quite a few years later, Husky moved their whole staff down to Cody, Wyoming. Because Canadian Husky bought out American Husky, which had never been heard of before, a Canadian oil company buying out an American one. And I decided not to go down there, and in the meantime, this Lois Robinson had offered me to come to see the job in the steel business, which I did, and I accepted, and I stayed in Calgary. And it was a terrific experience then, and then actually about 20 years later, the German company I was working for here, they got bought out, and then I became an entrepreneur in the oil and gas business, raising money for oil and gas drilling. And then of all things, if you can believe this, I got involved in the film business. And Bill Murray, who is a great star, and he still is, we gave him his first film called Meatballs. It was a story of a summer camp in Canada, and from there he did about another 8, 9 movies, and we were involved in all those. And I raised money for 14 films, which Meatballs was the most successful. But 8 films out of 14 were successful, which is something for the film business. So that was basically my life, and I just retired from business about 2-3 years ago. But I couldn't have been involved in business in Calgary at a better time. The decades that I worked compared to now, which is a disaster. In those days, as long as you knew somebody and you had some good idea, they listened to you, and if they liked what you were doing, they would finance you. So they financed me just like I financed the geologists who had wells to drill in the oil business, and my whole life was basically oil and gas and films. And so I had a busy life, a successful life, and I thank the good Lord for giving me the health to carry on, even now to 90 years. And I'm just thankful I moved to Calgary and met my wife Eileen, and my sons Larry and Rod, and my daughter Diane. They all have children, and they're thankful I moved here too. So take care, everyone listening to this. God bless, and thank you for the time. Goodbye.